It happened in broad daylight. The kind of heat-heavy afternoon where the neighborhood feels too quiet, too still, like it's holding its breath. Dante Romano, the Mafia boss everyone feared but no one truly saw, was walking through a narrow alley behind the cafe he owned. Just a routine check. Nothing unusual until he heard footsteps. Small, frantic, scraping against broken pavement. A little girl burst into the alley, lungs burning, eyes wide with terror. She kept looking over her shoulder as she ran, stumbling, clutching a torn backpack. Dante stepped aside naturally, but she didn't pass him. She ran straight into him, grabbing the front of his shirt with both hands. Please act like you're my dad," she gasped, her voice shaking so hard it barely held together. Dante blinked, stunned. Before he could speak, she pressed herself behind him, hiding, trembling. Then he saw them. Two men at the mouth of the alley, moving fast, scanning the shadows, whispering to each other. One pointed toward the girl's direction. Her fingers dug into Dante's coat. He said, "He's coming back for me," she whispered, "and I can't let him find me again." Dante didn't need to hear another word. He turned slightly, putting himself between her and the men, shoulders broad, gaze cold, the quiet kind of dangerous. The men froze because they didn't just find a runaway girl. They had walked straight into the path of the one man no criminal in the city dared to cross. And the girl hiding behind him had no idea the stranger she'd begged to act like her dad was capable of becoming far more than that. Stay with me until the end, because what this little girl reveals about who those men were will turn this simple encounter into a war the city never saw coming. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. The two men approaching wore cheap suits that couldn't hide the bulge of weapons underneath their jackets. Their faces carried that particular hardness that comes from years of doing things decent people never speak about. But when they saw Dante Romano standing there, something shifted in their expressions. Recognition flickered across their features like lightning before a storm. "Boss Romano," the taller one said, his voice carrying forced respect mixed with real fear. "We didn't know you were here." Dante's hand moved to rest protectively on the girl's shoulder. She was maybe 7 years old with dark hair stuck to her forehead from running and tear tracks cutting clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. Her entire body shook against his legs like a leaf caught in hurricane winds. "Gentlemen," Dante's voice was calm, measured, the kind of calm that came before violence in his world. "You seem to be looking for something." The shorter man cleared his throat nervously. "Just a runaway, sir. Nothing that concerns you. She belongs to our employer." "Belongs." Dante repeated the word like he was tasting poison. "Children don't belong to anyone except their families." The girl's grip on his coat tightened. She whispered something so quietly only he could hear it. "They took me from the playground. They said my daddy owes them money." Dante felt something cold settle in his chest. In 30 years of controlling the most dangerous criminal organization on the East Coast, he'd drawn lines that even his enemies respected. Children were sacred. Children were untouchable. Anyone who crossed that line didn't just disappear. They suffered first. "Your employer," Dante said, his voice dropping to that tone his lieutenants knew meant someone was about to die. "What's his name?" The two men exchanged glances. The taller one shifted his weight from foot to foot. "Vincent Torino, sir. He runs operations down by the docks." Dante knew that name. Vincent Torino was small-time muscle who'd been pushing boundaries for months, testing how far he could go before the Romano family noticed. Apparently, he'd finally found that line. And what exactly does little Sophia's father owe Torino? Dante asked. The girl looked up at him with wide eyes. He'd guessed her name correctly. Something about her reminded him of his sister Sophia, who died in a car accident 15 years ago. The same defiant chin. The same way of standing even when terrified. 20,000. The shorter man answered. Plus interest. Torino gave him 6 months to pay. Time's up. So you take his daughter? Dante's question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Business is business. Boss Romano, you understand. But Dante didn't understand. In his organization, debts were settled between adults. Families were protected, not threatened. There was honor, even in their darkness. Rules that separated them from the animals who preyed on innocence. Sophia tugged on his coat again. "Mister, they said they were going to hurt me if my daddy doesn't give them money. But my daddy works 2 jobs, and he still can't pay rent sometimes." The pieces clicked together in Dante's mind like bullets sliding into a chamber. Vincent Torino was running a kidnapping operation targeting children of people who owed him money, using fear and desperation to collect debts that probably came from his own predatory lending schemes. "Here's what's going to happen," Dante said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never had his orders questioned. "You're going to walk away. You're going to tell Torino that Sophia is under Romano protection now, and you're going to explain to him that anyone who touches a child in this city has declared war on my family." The taller man's face went pale. "Boss, with respect, Torino's not going to like that message." "Good," Dante replied. "I'm counting on it." He knelt down to Sophia's eye level, his massive frame folding with surprising gentleness. "What's your daddy's name, sweetheart?" "Marco Castellano. He fixes cars at the garage on 5th Street. Dante knew the place. A real business in a neighborhood where real businesses struggled to survive. Marco was probably desperate enough to borrow from anyone willing to lend, not knowing he was signing his daughter's death warrant. "Sophia, I want you to listen to me very carefully," Dante said. "These men are never going to bother you again. Your daddy's debt is gone. You're safe now. But why would you help us? You don't even know us." The question hit him harder than he expected. Why was he helping? In his world, kindness was weakness. Compassion got you killed. But looking at this terrified little girl who'd been brave enough to run, smart enough to seek protection, desperate enough to trust a complete stranger, he saw something that reminded him why he'd gotten into this business in the first place. Before the power corrupted everything, before the violence became routine, before he'd forgotten that some things were worth protecting. "Because that's what dads do," he said simply. "They protect their children." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. But for the first time since she'd crashed into the alley, they weren't tears of fear. "Are you really going to be my dad?" Dante felt something crack open in his chest. Something he'd thought died with his sister 15 years ago. Something that felt dangerously like hope. But before he could answer, his phone buzzed with a text message that would change everything. A message from Vincent Torino himself. A message that revealed this wasn't just about one little girl or one desperate father. This was about something much bigger, much darker, and much more dangerous than Dante had ever imagined. Dante's phone screen glowed with Vincent Torino's message. 3 simple words that changed everything. "We have more. More children. More innocent lives caught in Torino's web of desperation and greed." Sophia wasn't an isolated case. She was just the one brave enough to run. "What does it say?" Sophia whispered, tugging on his sleeve. Dante slipped the phone back into his pocket, his jaw tightening like steel under pressure. "Nothing you need to worry about, little one." But everything had just shifted. This wasn't about collecting a debt anymore. Vincent Torino was operating a full-scale operation, using children as leverage against desperate parents across the city. And somehow Dante had missed it happening right under his nose. The 2 men still stood at the alley's entrance, shifting nervously, waiting for orders that would determine whether they lived through the next 5 minutes. "Tell me something," Dante said, his voice carrying that deadly quiet that made seasoned criminals confess their sins. "How many other children does Torino have?" The shorter man's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Boss, that's not really our department. We just do pickups and deliveries." "Wrong answer." Dante's hand moved to his jacket, and both men flinched. "Let me rephrase that. How many families is Torino terrorizing right now?" "Maybe 6, 7 families." The taller man blurted out. "Look, we just grab the kids when parents can't pay. Hold them for a day or 2 until the money comes through. Nobody gets hurt if people cooperate." Sophia made a small sound of distress. Dante's protective instincts flared like gasoline meeting flame. These weren't professional criminals following a code. These were predators feeding on the vulnerable, destroying families for pocket change. "Where does he keep them?" Dante's question carried the weight of an ultimatum. "There's a warehouse down by Pier 17. old shipping container converted into rooms. Torino calls it his insurance policy. Dante memorized every detail. Pier 17 was Romano territory. Had been for over a decade, which meant Vincent Torino wasn't just crossing moral lines. He was crossing into Dante's domain, operating under his protection, making him look weak to every criminal organization on the East Coast. Sophia, Dante said gently, I need you to do something very important for me. Can you be brave for just a little bit longer? She nodded with the serious determination of a child who'd already survived more than most adults ever would. I'm going to take you somewhere safe while I handle this situation. There's a woman named Maria who runs a bakery 3 blocks from here. She's going to take care of you until I can bring you back to your father. But what about the other kids? Sophia asked. The ones those men talked about. The question hit Dante like a punch to the chest. Here was this 7-year-old girl, terrified and traumatized, thinking about children she'd never met, who might be suffering the same fear she'd just escaped. In that moment, Dante understood why he'd been drawn to protect her. It wasn't just her resemblance to his sister. It was her heart. Despite everything she'd endured, she still cared about others. I'm going to get them all, he promised. Every single one. Sophia studied his face with the intensity of someone far older than her years. You're not just pretending to be my dad, are you? You really mean it. Dante felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. For 15 years, he'd ruled through fear, built an empire on violence, commanded respect through intimidation. But this little girl was asking him to be something he'd forgotten how to be. Someone who protected instead of destroyed. Someone who saved instead of condemned. Yes, he said, it meant it more than any promise he'd ever made. I really mean it. The 2 men at the alley entrance were growing restless. They delivered their message and received orders they couldn't possibly follow. Telling Vincent Torino that Dante Romano had claimed protection over his operation was basically signing their own death warrants. Boss, the taller man said hesitantly. What do we tell Torino? Dante stood slowly, Sophia's small hand slipping into his massive one with complete trust. You tell him that Dante Romano is coming. You tell him he has until midnight to release every child in his custody and disappear from my city. And you tell him that if he's stupid enough to still be here tomorrow morning, I'll hunt him down personally. And if he asks what happens then, Dante's smile held no warmth whatsoever. Then you explain to him exactly what happened to the last man who threatened children under my protection. Both men went pale. Everyone in the city knew that story. How Dante had found a man running an illegal adoption ring selling babies to the highest bidders. How that man had been found 3 days later and the coroner had needed dental records to identify what was left of him. Now get out of my sight before I decide you're both too much of a liability to walk away. They didn't need to be told twice. Within seconds, the alley was empty except for Dante and Sophia. The afternoon sun casting long shadows across the broken pavement. Sophia squeezed his hand. Are you scared of Torino? No, sweetheart. Men like that are cowards who prey on the weak because they're too pathetic to face anyone who can fight back. Then why does your hand feel shaky? Dante looked down at her, surprised by her perception. She was right. His hand was trembling slightly, but not from fear of Vincent Torino or his operation. He was shaking because for the first time in 15 years, someone was depending on him not just to destroy, but to protect. Not just to inspire fear, but to provide safety. Because, he said quietly, I haven't been someone's dad for a very long time. I'm not sure I remember how. Sophia's smile could have powered the entire city block. That's okay. I haven't had a dad for a long time either. We can figure out together. As they walked toward Maria's bakery, Dante was already planning the rescue operation that would take place in 6 hours. He was calculating how many men he'd need, what weapons they'd require, how to breach the warehouse without putting the children at risk. But part of his mind kept circling back to Sophia's words. We can figure out together. Like being a family was something you learned, something you practiced, something you chose every single day. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Vincent Torino. This one contained a photo that made Dante's blood turn to ice water in his veins. because suddenly, this wasn't just about Sofia or even the children in the warehouse. Vincent Torino had just made this personal in a way that would bring every criminal organization in the country to war. The photograph on Dante's phone showed something that made his heart stop completely. It wasn't just another child in Torino's custody. It was a picture of his own nephew, 8-year-old Marcus, sitting tied to a chair in what looked like the same warehouse where the other children were being held. Marcus was his sister Sophia's son, the sister who died 15 years ago. The boy Dante had been secretly supporting financially through anonymous payments to his foster family, making sure he had everything he needed while staying hidden in the shadows of the child's life. Vincent Torino had somehow discovered this connection, somehow learned that the most feared man in the city had one weakness, one person who could bring him to his knees. The message below the photo was simple. Midnight deadline canceled. Come alone to Pier 17 or the Romano bloodline ends tonight. Sofia noticed his face change, saw the color drain from his features like water from a broken dam. What's wrong? You look scary now. Dante forced his expression back to calm, but inside his mind was calculating at lightning speed. Torino wasn't just running a kidnapping operation. He was declaring war on the Romano family directly, using children as weapons in a battle that could tear the entire criminal underworld apart. Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. Everything's going to be fine. But even as he said it, Dante knew this had just become the most dangerous situation of his entire career. They reached Maria's bakery, a warm little corner shop that smelled like fresh bread and cinnamon. Maria Castellanos had worked for the Romano family for 20 years, handling real businesses and serving as a safe house when needed. She was also the only person Dante trusted completely with something as precious as a child's safety. Maria, Dante called as they entered, the bell above the door chiming softly. A woman in her 50s emerged from the back room, flour dusting her apron. Warm brown eyes that immediately focused on Sofia with motherly concern. Dante, what's happened? This little one looks like she's been through hell. She needs protection for a few hours while I handle some business. Can you keep her safe? Maria's expression grew serious. In 20 years of working with the Romano organization, she'd never seen Dante personally escort a child to safety. Of course. Sofia, is it? Come here, sweetheart. Are you hungry? Sofia looked up at Dante with eyes full of trust and worry. You're coming back, right? You're not going to disappear like other grown-ups do. The question hit him harder than any physical blow he'd ever taken. I promise you, Sofia, I'm coming back. And when I do, you'll never have to be afraid again. She hugged him fiercely around the waist. This tiny 7-year-old, who'd somehow become the center of his universe in the span of 30 minutes. Be careful, Daddy. The words sent shock waves through his entire body. Daddy, not Mr., not Sir, not even Dante. She'd claimed him as completely as he'd claimed her, with the absolute faith that only children possessed. Maria led Sofia to a comfortable corner booth, already chattering about cookies and hot chocolate, but Dante could see the little girl watching him through the window as he made his phone calls. Tony, he said when his lieutenant answered. Code Black, I need the full crew armed and ready at the warehouse district in 2 hours. What's the situation, boss? Vincent Torino has Marcus. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for 5 full seconds. Everyone in Dante's inner circle knew about Marcus, knew that the boy represented the last link to Sofia Romano, the sister whose death had nearly destroyed their leader 15 years ago. How many men do you want? All of them. And Tony, this isn't a negotiation. This isn't a business transaction. This is family. Dante's second call was to Dr. Patricia Mendez, a children's trauma specialist who worked quietly with law enforcement to help rescued children. Doctor, I need you standing by for multiple child victims, severe psychological trauma, possible physical abuse. How many children are we talking about? 7 confirmed, possibly more. They've been held for days, maybe weeks. And doctor, one of them is mine. His third call was the most difficult. Marco Castellano, Sofia's father, deserved to know his daughter was safe and that the men who terrorized his family would never threaten anyone again. Mr. Castellano, this is Dante Romano. Your daughter Sofia is safe. The sobbing on the other end of the line was immediate and overwhelming. "Oh God, thank you. I thought they were going to kill her. I thought I'd never see her again. She's incredibly brave, Mr. Castellano. You should be proud of the daughter you've raised. I don't understand how this happened. I borrowed money for my mother's surgery, and then the interest kept climbing. And they said if I couldn't pay, they'd take Sophia until I found the money somehow." Dante felt his rage building like pressure in a boiler. Torino wasn't just kidnapping children for ransom. He was targeting desperate families, exploiting medical emergencies and financial crises, turning people's love for their children into weapons against them. "Your debt is forgiven, Mr. Castellano. All of it. And Sophia is going to have protection for as long as she needs it. I don't know how to thank you. Take care of your daughter. Love her. That's all the thanks I need." As Dante prepared for what would likely be the most dangerous confrontation of his career, he found himself thinking about Sophia's question. "Why would you help us? You don't even know us." The truth was more complicated than he'd admitted. For 15 years, he'd built an empire on fear and violence, commanding respect through intimidation and brutality. But somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten the original reason he'd entered this world. Protection, family, making sure that people he cared about were safe from the predators who hunted in the shadows. Sophia had reminded him of that purpose, not just because she looked like his sister, but because she'd shown him what real courage looked like. A 7-year-old girl running from men twice her size, smart enough to seek protection, brave enough to trust a stranger, kind enough to worry about other children, even while her own life hung in the balance. His phone buzzed with a final message from Vincent Torino. 1 hour. Come alone or they all die. But Dante Romano hadn't built the most powerful criminal organization on the East Coast by following other people's rules. He'd built it by being smarter, more ruthless, and more protective of what mattered than anyone who dared to challenge him. Vincent Torino was about to learn why no one in their right mind declared war on the Romano family. And Marcus, along with every other child in that warehouse, was coming home tonight. But first, Dante had one more stop to make. Someone who could provide him with information that would turn this rescue mission from dangerous to devastating for everyone who'd participated in Torino's operation. Because this wasn't just about saving children anymore. This was about sending a message to every criminal in the city that some lines could never be crossed without consequences that would echo for generations. The war Vincent Torino had started was about to become the last mistake he'd ever make. The warehouse at Pier 17 stood like a concrete monument to human cruelty. Its windows boarded shut, its loading dock sealed, except for one entrance that Torino's men watched with the lazy confidence of predators who'd never faced real danger. Dante crouched on the rooftop of an adjacent building, studying the layout through military-grade binoculars. 6 guards outside, probably twice that number inside. Motion sensors on the main approaches. Security cameras covering every angle except the one blind spot that Torino's arrogance had created. Because Vincent Torino had made one critical mistake. He'd assumed that 15 years of ruling through fear had made Dante soft, comfortable, predictable. He'd forgotten that before Dante became a boss, he'd been a soldier who'd earned his reputation in the bloodiest gang war the city had ever seen. Tony's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Boss, we've got eyes on 7 children in the main holding area. Marcus is in a separate room in the back. They've got him isolated." Dante's jaw tightened. Separating Marcus wasn't just strategic. It was psychological warfare designed to break Dante's focus. Make him choose between saving his nephew and protecting the other children. Classic intimidation tactics from someone who'd clearly studied the Romano family's vulnerabilities. Medical team status. Dante whispered into his microphone. "Dr. Mendez is standing by with 3 ambulances 2 blocks out. Child Services Coordinator is en route. We got safe houses prepared for immediate relocation." Everything was in place except for the part where Dante walked into what was obviously a trap designed to eliminate the Romano family's leadership permanently. His phone buzzed. Another message from Torino. "Clock's ticking, Romano. Come alone, or I start sending you pieces." But Dante had stopped following other people's timelines the moment he'd built his empire. And Vincent Torino was about to discover that threatening children didn't make you powerful. It made you a target for someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. All units, go dark for 60 seconds, Dante commanded. The next minute unfolded like a choreographed dance of violence and precision. Dante's men moved through the warehouse district like shadows, disabling security systems, neutralizing perimeter guards, establishing firing positions that would give them complete tactical advantage when the shooting started. Because the shooting would start, men like Vincent Torino didn't negotiate. They only understood force, and they only respected power applied with absolute ruthlessness. Dante approached the main entrance exactly at midnight, hands visible, appearing to follow Torino's demands for a solo confrontation. But appearances could be deceiving, and Dante had built his reputation on being the most deceptive man in a business where lies were currency. The warehouse door opened before he could knock. Vincent Torino himself stood in the entrance, a thin man in his 40s with dead eyes and the particular kind of smile that came from enjoying other people's pain. Dante Romano, Torino said, his voice carrying mock respect. The great protector of the innocent finally decided to join the party. Where are the children? Safe and sound. Well, mostly sound. Kids can be so clumsy when they're scared. Torino's grin widened. But don't worry. I've been taking excellent care of your nephew. He's got his mother's eyes, doesn't he? Same eye she had right before the car accident. The implication hit Dante like a physical blow. Torino wasn't just talking about Marcus. He was claiming responsibility for Sophia's death 15 years ago. The car accident that had destroyed Dante's world, that had turned him from a man with hope into a machine designed for vengeance. You're saying you killed my sister. I'm saying accidents happen to people who don't pay their debts, just like accidents happen to people who interfere with my business operations. Torino stepped back, gesturing for Dante to enter. Come on in. Let's discuss the terms of your nephew's survival. The warehouse interior was exactly what Dante had expected. A maze of shipping containers converted into makeshift cells, guards positioned at strategic choke points, and the overwhelming stench of fear and desperation that came from children who'd been terrorized for days. But Dante also noticed what Torino couldn't see. The tiny red dots of laser sights from his snipers positioned on rooftops across the street. The barely visible movement of his men already inside the building, having entered through the drainage system 30 minutes earlier. Impressive operation, Dante said, his voice calm despite the rage building in his chest. How long have you been trafficking children? Trafficking? That's such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as providing leverage for debt collection. Amazing how quickly people find money when their children's safety depends on it. Torino led him deeper into the warehouse, past containers where Dante could hear muffled crying, past guards who watched him with the confident arrogance of men who believed they held all the advantages. They stopped in front of a heavy steel door. Torino produced a key ring, selecting one with theatrical precision. Your nephew's been asking for you. Apparently, someone's been sending him anonymous birthday presents every year. Christmas gifts, school supplies. Imagine my surprise when I discovered the great Dante Romano has been playing Secret Guardian Angel. The door opened to reveal Marcus tied to a chair in a concrete room barely large enough for two people. The 8-year-old boy looked up with eyes that were unmistakably Sophia's eyes, bright and defiant despite the terror he'd endured. Uncle Dante, Marcus whispered, his voice cracking with relief and disbelief. Dante felt something fundamental break apart in his chest. This child knew who he was. Despite years of staying hidden, of protecting from the shadows, Marcus had somehow figured out that his anonymous benefactor was family. Hello, Marcus. I'm here to take you home. Torino laughed. A sound like breaking glass. Touching reunion. But I'm afraid neither of you are leaving. You see, killing Dante Romano is worth more than any ransom I could collect. There are 6 families who've put bounties on your head. Enough money to retire and disappear forever. 6 families? Dante repeated, genuinely curious despite the immediate danger. I'm flattered. Which 6? The Moretts, the Castellis, the Russos, the Vitales, the Benedettos, and the Torinos. Everyone you've destroyed over the years. Everyone who's been waiting for the right moment to strike back. Dante nodded thoughtfully. That's interesting because 3 of those families don't exist anymore. I eliminated the Moretz and Russos completely 2 years ago. The Vitales moved to California and agreed never to return to the East Coast. Torino's confident expression flickered slightly, which means you're working with the Castellis and Benedettos, plus your own people. And since the Benedettos have been trying to move into my territory for months, I'm guessing this entire operation is their idea, and you're just the expendable frontman. You think you're so smart, Romano, but you walked right into our trap. Your nephew dies first, then you, then every other child in this warehouse, unless their families pay triple the original debt. But Dante was already moving. His hand went to the concealed knife in his jacket, the blade that had ended more lives than Torino could imagine. And as he moved, he spoke into the nearly invisible microphone clipped to his collar. All units, execute. The warehouse exploded into controlled chaos. Dante's men breached every entrance simultaneously, moving with the precision of a military operation. Smoke grenades filled the air, cutting visibility to 0. Flashbang grenades disoriented Torino's guards, giving Dante's team the few seconds they needed to establish overwhelming tactical advantage. Dante tackled Torino in the darkness, his knife finding the man's throat with surgical precision. You made 2 mistakes, Dante whispered as Torino struggled uselessly against his grip. First, you threatened children. Second, you mentioned my sister. Wait, I can give you the Benedettos. I can tell you everything. 6 months later, Sofia Castellano Romano sat at the breakfast table of Dante's estate, carefully drawing pictures while Marcus helped her with homework. The warehouse that had held them captive was now the community center funded by the Romano Foundation for Child Protection. Vincent Torino never made it to trial. Neither did the Benedetto family leadership, who had orchestrated the entire operation. Some threats to children simply couldn't be allowed to exist in any form. The little girl who had asked a stranger to pretend to be her father had accidentally chosen the one man capable of making that pretense into reality. Sometimes protection comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the most dangerous people become the safest harbor for those who need saving most. What started as a desperate plea in an alley became a family forged in fire and sealed in blood. And in a world where power corrupts almost everyone, Sofia reminded Dante that true strength comes from knowing what's worth protecting, no matter the cost.